Hello and welcome to tonight's webinar on teen anxiety and depression. My name is Dr. Michelle Doherty of Lifetime Health and Wellness, and I'm just really happy to know that there are so many parents that have been interested in this topic, and there's some healthcare workers that are also tuning in because this is a time right now that we need to be paying attention to stuff like this. We're going through a pandemic, obviously, and I want to share, obviously what's at stake. And what I mean by that is just the greater incidence of mental illness and societal troubles and different things like that. And it's tough enough just navigating through puberty. But then when you're throwing a bunch of stress into the mix and knowing that we are experiencing stress at a much earlier age and to a much higher degree than us as parents have ever had to encounter. So you also throw in a pandemic where there's social isolation, physical isolation. It's overwhelming and they're not sure what to do, and you're probably feeling the same way. You may be feeling this yourself. So I wanted to create some awareness and hopefully create more of a positive ripple effect on solutions, and that there is hope and we will get on the other side of this. But it's hard to see more than a foot in front of you when we have all of this coming down on us. So we are going to uncover the three main types or causes of stress in our teens. We're going to define how anxiety presents in our teenagers, how depression presents, and then of course some natural solutions so we can start to get ahead of this or around this, or whatever the case may be, because it is this important. So I really do thank you for tuning in. And for the first time, I'm not using slides. I want to connect directly with you. So forgive me as I look down occasionally. I have an outline just so I can keep myself on track and make sure that I am hitting all the points that I'm hoping to get through to you. So with that, first we need to talk about what anxiety is. So it's generally connected with nervousness and fear and apprehension and worrying. And this can produce physical symptoms as well. And anxiety is basically a safety mechanism of our body. If you think about your brain and nervous system having two sides, we have a fight or flight or freeze side, and then we have a calming and healing and developing side. So we want to be able to navigate seamlessly between the two. Now, when we're under more stress, we tend to get stuck more in one mode, and that makes it more difficult to function. So it's not, when it comes to anxiety, it's not so much a mechanism problem as it is a perception of danger type of problem. Because the one thing we all have control over is our mindsets and what we allow to actually come in. And this state of protection of fight or flight, it becomes a problem when it's activated all the time when it shouldn't be. And when it comes to anxiety, there's basically two modes. There's the mode that completely freezes you up. So these are the teens that are starting to get panic attacks, and they're not able to do what they need to do. But on the flip side, we have what I usually nickname a high functioning anxiety, which is our perfectionists, our straight A students that are gonna be go, 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 involved in all the extracurricular activities, sports, just going full throttle, wanting to be the best, feeling like that's the only way that they have control of their bodies and themselves. And it's hard to look at that as a parent, whether you imposed it or not. It's hard to sit back and watch because you can see them spiraling out of control. But from the outside, they look like they have it all together. They're just, very focused and determined. But on the inside, they are just doing the best they can to tread water and just going full steam ahead. So wanting to also dive into depression. So we know it's a mental health disorder characterized by just persistently depressed and low moods, a loss of interest in activities. That should be your first telltale sign, parents, is if they enjoyed a certain sport or an activity or a hobby, and then they're just, now just more withdrawn and disconnected, they're not talking to you, they're not confiding in anyone, they're just shutting down, that is a major problem. This sets in, and they typically can't get out of it. And how it presents even earlier in the teenage years is if we had a kiddo that was more ADHD, when they're going full steam ahead, eventually they're going to run out of gas. And then as they grow into teens, they separate into falling into an anxiety category or more depressive. And we tend to see anxiety follow more females than males. Obviously, there are boys with anxiety, but as far as the patterns, we're seeing that the girls tend to go more anxiety and the boys tend to go more depressive. So that is another thing that we're taking these little cues as we're seeing our little ones grow and develop and what their tendencies are. And sometimes we're not going to see some of this stuff until they are in high school, 15, 16, 17 years old. So with that, the concern, especially with depression, is that for some, there could be some self-harm or attempts with that. But just noticing if they're just sleeping so much more, it's hard for them to wake up. Their performance is going down, again, in stuff that used to interest them, but also school. It's just like everything has gotten down a notch. But then there can also be the combination of anxiety and depression. So as I mentioned, they can have those combinations, especially if they were more high energy and less focused as a kid. Then they can have bouts of anxiety and blowouts and then immediately turn withdrawn. And so that's very tough as a parent to handle, because you feel like you can't really do anything to help your teen, and they don't even know what they need. They're still trying to figure out who they are. So what is causing stress in our teens? Really 3 categories I want you to think of. So we have physical stress, chemical stress, and emotional stress. So if we just want to start off with physical stress, right now, if we have a teen who is a school athlete and they are in club sports, school sports, and they're basically training all year long, they are having constant repetitive physical stresses on their bodies. There's a lot more injuries happening. All of these demands to be at their best. I mean, I feel like the middle school sports are as intense as high school sports were when I was growing up. And high school sports are more like, the major leagues. And it's a lot. It's a lot to live up to. And, kids need to be allowed to be kids and do things that they enjoy. So if they're overtraining and getting injured, that's one thing. But then we have the opposite. If they're very underactive, they're not one for sports, which is okay. But let's say they're more prone toward video gaming and things like that, because now technology is so prevalent that it seems like everyone has a smartphone, everyone's on a tablet. And now with the virtual and e-learning, we're all stuck behind a screen. So we're having more of that forward head posture, which can be detrimental to our health because it is causing just a shift in your neurology. So the input that you're getting is not going to be perceived and organized as well, and we get less oxygen to the brain. There's a lot of different things that is wrong with tech neck and tech postures. So those are obviously one of the first things that I look at as a pediatric and family chiropractor. Is we know that structure dictates function, and function is really the name of the game here. And being able to control our emotions and our moods are certainly at the top. When it comes to, I should also mention, when we are less active, so even if we had an active kid and now with this shelter-in-place order, we're having growth spurts still, right? So if you're having more growth spurts and you're less active, you're actually decreasing tone in your core. So you have less core strength, which means it's even more difficult to sustain good posture. It takes a lot more energy and effort. So especially when it comes to boys, they need that physical activity. That helps to calm their brain. It helps to calm all of our brains, but more on that in a little bit. We also have chemical stress. So this is going to be like our junk food, our sugar. When we were driving around a lot, especially these sophomores that are getting their driver's licenses, they're going through like the McDonald's drive-through and Starbucks and just inundating their systems with building blocks that really aren't serving them, their development, their mental acuity, all of that stuff. But then some are turning to drinking alcohol and that type of consumption, recreational drugs, vaping is on the rise. All of these things, these are, you know, as teens are trying to gain their independence, sometimes they have very poor coping mechanisms, and peer pressure can also lead them down that route. And again, it's tough for a parent to watch, but also you may not have the first clue that it could be going on, especially if they're shutting you out. And that's very tough. But also women and young girls, we tend to be more of the product junkies. So we are applying more of the makeup and the lotions and the salves and different things like that. And there's a lot of known hormone disruptors in this stuff. And we absorb 60% of everything we apply to our skin. And especially when you have a growing, developing body and different hormones that are getting released in certain sequences, and then we're ingesting or applying hormone disruptors, it can really put a kink to that whole cascade. But also could be the other side. Increased stress could cause these teens to stop eating. We can start to see anorexia because they're trying to keep up with social media standards and, you know, what's popular out there. Another, you know, piece is that more young adults are on medications now than they ever have been. And of course, there's a time and place, but I want to wrap this in when we start talking about solutions. And then mental emotional stress. This is the biggest and toughest pattern to unwind in our teenagers, because our brains don't ever really shut off. You know, you're not eating 24/7. It may feel like that during this pandemic because it seems like there's not much else to do, but our brains don't ever shut off. And so between peer pressure, you know, scrolling through Instagram and Facebook and that whole comparison and wanting to look a certain way and keep up, and then making time for your inner circle of friends, could be romantic relationships, time management, especially for the perfectionists out there, all the test taking, college preparations, ACTs, SATs, all of these things. There's a lot of decisions that are being made. What college do I want to go to? Do I even want to go to college? My parents want this for me. I don't know if this is right. It's a constant struggle that just doesn't turn off. And all of this is important to address only because our brains aren't even fully mature until we're about 25 years old. It's not 18. You know, yes, we can vote at that time. We graduate from high school, but girls tend to mature earlier. But I just wanted to do just a quick little, since I have the screen here. If we look at our thumb as more of the emotional brain right here, and then as we grow and develop, there's that logical part of the brain. So as young little kids, we have this part. This is what we default to all the time. We don't really have this part in play or very developed at all. And in teenagers, we're about like, meh, like maybe more of like that. We have some of that logical brain, but when hormones and stress overtake, we default to the path of least resistance, which is going to be our emotional brain. So it's almost like, you know, intensified temper tantrums. And, you know, it really is interesting because yes, our kids don't understand the frontal lobe, which is the logical brain. And when stress hits, we go to bad coping mechanisms. And I already gave some examples a little bit ago. The cool thing is that chiropractic can help influence that logical part of the brain, which brings more of a sense of calm. And another neat thing is that there's a lot of science and research underway right now in New Zealand. I had the pleasure of actually getting to meet some of these researchers in the past year. And they are looking at how chiropractic can influence that logical brain. And so we are excited to be able to support this mission. And in the same breath, it's just validating to know that what Dr. Carey and I have the pleasure of seeing every single day, and it seems like miracles unraveling at Lifetime Health and Wellness, it's being backed by science. So really cool. With all of this, what are some options for your teens to improve their quality of life and therefore your quality of life as parents and as a family unit? Because they have some of that independence and that desire, they can really take part in their own health. It's not 100% up to you like it was when they were really little. So one thing is that there are two standard options. You know, if any parent were to research, you know, what can I do for my teen anxiety or my teen's depression? And the two top things that we see are there's medication, and sometimes that's where parents will go to, you know, in order to put the fire out. And I totally respect that. And sometimes, yeah, we need to do that to get some sense of calm and sanity. The second is cognitive behavioral therapy. This is counseling. This is therapy. I'm a really big fan of having, you know, a third party helping you navigate through your emotions and coping mechanisms and just a game plan for your own success. And sometimes that's better received from someone that's not related to your teen. But that, of course, is if they're willing to talk to someone. So the way I've kind of seen things, at least with the families we've been able to serve over the past 14 years, is if they're willing to talk, counseling can be great and very helpful for them. If they're not willing to talk, usually it's medication, or sometimes it's a combination. And still then, they may get to a point where they plateau, or maybe it's not as effective. And so you're on here tonight for some solutions. And so I wanted to present a few things here. So number one, first and foremost, is movement. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to touch on this again. Movement is life. When you're moving, your brain is this big sensory-seeking organ. It's relying on all of its senses to bring information from the environment so that it, in turn, can effectively communicate with every other part of your body. So good input is going to result in good output, which is what we see on the outside, the behaviors. And movement, you don't have to be an athlete, but if you're doing some type of purposeful movement, well, let's talk about the athletes real quick. You know, you want to make sure if they are going to be involved in athletics, it's actually something that they enjoy and that they're not feeling like they have to perform or they have to live up to maybe your standard as parents or their coach's standards, but it needs to be something that brings them joy. And we need a break. We need a break every now and then. It's okay. But movement is very calming to the brain, as I mentioned before. So when we start to see this in our kids that are more ADHD and they're constantly going, they need to be getting outside. And during a time like this, where we're more restricted, it's still important to get outside, get that fresh air, walk around barefoot once it eventually gets warmer, and climb and play and interact. That's how we're getting that good feedback to the brain. Meditation and yoga. I mean, now in this day and age where you can find a ton of apps when it comes to meditation, a lot of them are free right now during this pandemic. There's YouTube videos on meditation and yoga, and so there's almost no excuse when it comes to seeking this stuff out, but I understand there's so much out there that becomes overwhelming. So that's a great way to help calm the nervous system. When the nervous system is more calm, it perceives better, it can focus better, it can make better decisions. While you're meditating and doing yoga, you know, if you are into essential oils, lavender is a great one. So it's a great way to stimulate the senses to bring more of a sense of peace and calming. Writing is a big one. I'm a big fan of a gratitude journal, just making sure that you start and end your day with good. But let's say you need to just brain dump those emotions. any issues that you're having before you blow up at someone, but write down your dreams as well. We need to focus on more good things out there. Time management, especially for our overachievers out there that are so self-critical and feeling like they always have to get the job done. We know that having a plan in place and a routine is one of the best ways to reduce anxiety, no matter what age you are. We need to know what to expect and have some sense of control. So being able to manage your time, whether it's the iCalendar feature on your smartphone or having a physical planner, and then of course, having one main thing that you're supposed to accomplish that day instead of a mile long. That's tough for many, but just looking at what is the most important thing that I should accomplish today, and then have gratitude for it afterwards. Last but not least, chiropractic. If you're tuning in, it's probably because you're looking for another option, or if you are a healthcare provider, how you can complement what you're doing to maximize on the effects of the therapy. So we have numerous stories and case studies within chiropractic on the positive effects that it can have on the brain and nervous system, but the whole point is to bring balance. And again, if there's two sides, stress and calm, you need to be able to fluctuate between the two and not be stuck in any one place. But ultimately, chiropractic is going to enhance your ability to adapt to stress and whatever life has to throw its way. It's not going to eliminate stress. And things are stressful now. Just think of when your teen becomes an adult. Stress only gets more. So the question is, what type of coping mechanism do you have? As little kids, they're not aware of stress and they don't have coping mechanisms whatsoever. As teens, they are aware of their stress, but their coping mechanisms are still pretty immature. And then as adults, we know that we're stressed and we willfully are choosing coping mechanisms that are socially acceptable, but maybe is not moving the needle for us. And we continue to go down the rabbit hole. So back to chiropractic, by activating the logical parts of our brain, it helps to unwind stressed systems within the body. So some of the things that can come from this is improved sleep. I can't tell you how many kids in 6th and 7th grade are having trouble falling asleep, shutting their brains down. Or for others, maybe they crash. They've been go, they crash at the end of the night, but they're waking up multiple times a night, going through their to-do lists. Other things is better emotional regulation, improved relationships with their family, which we all want. We want our kids to be healthy and happy and grow into high-functioning, successful adults, whatever that looks like for them. But better decision-making. And we're going to make dumb decisions, even as adults we do. But if we have an immediate awareness of these poor choices, we are leaps and bounds ahead at this point. Not to mention digestion. I almost totally forgot to mention this, but another telltale sign that can show up in our young kids is that they get frequent stomach aches, and it's not related to hunger. It's almost like the tummy migraines, or it could be stress-related migraine headaches. So those are other telltale signs, but we see that digestion gets better when that fight or flight system is able to be put on pause for a little bit. It needs to activate when it needs to, but it needs to not be stuck on all the time. So for some people, they're having, increased bowel movements, like loose frequent stools, but it could also be the opposite. It could be constipation. They're just not eliminating. So the very things that babies should be doing, which is eat, sleep, and poop, those are the part of the calming side of the nervous system. And so these are all things that can improve when your nervous system is under a more balanced state. So parents, I know this topic just comes with a lot of frustration, overwhelm, uncertainty. If nothing else, I hope that you gained some awareness on where this stuff can be coming from. You may have some aha moments of stuff that you may have noticed. years ago, or something you could even be recognizing in yourself. So we know that when we know more, we do different, and we want to help support your teen and help them navigate through this crazy time that we're going through in our history right now. But more importantly, they need to be better able to adapt and be resilient, because it doesn't get any easier. So the way that we do that is we do scans in our office, and it probably sounds a little scary, but it's completely non-invasive. So we're able to see how stressed your teen is and how well they're coping and managing and adapting and where they're stuck. Because if there's one thing that we know is if you have a starting point and you know where you're starting from, it's easier to have a game plan to move ahead and look upward and onward, which is what we're all trying to do. So this is how we start the conversation, is looking at, the prenatal history, labor and delivery, and just looking at the milestones and just really painting a picture and just sitting down to have a conversation. But then also taking a look on the inside, the thing that is not so obvious, so that we can generate a game plan. If you feel like you're just at your wit's end, you're burnt out, you are disconnected from your kids, maybe this would be a good time to get checked. At the very least, if you have any questions whatsoever, please direct message us, leave us a phone message, email us, however you're most comfortable, because we understand, yes, the kids are our future. And right now we are all stuck in a state of stress. So if this can be one thing that you can add to the repertoire, whether you are or your kids are on medications or they're in counseling, chiropractic can also be that missing link. But we hope that you enjoyed the information that we presented, and please feel free to forward this to anyone that could maybe benefit. And again, please reach out, talk to someone, see if chiropractic can help. And we hope to tune in with you really soon. Take care, guys.